Central, and you have approximately 21 minutes of your initial speaking time, and you have your additional 15.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Much obliged, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I was saying that the bipolar nature of the bill is reflected in the attempt on the one hand to decriminalize for a small amount, 30 grams, and to punish even when it is less than 60 grams. And as we see later, some of the penalties are much harsher. So a 50,000 fine is being levied against someone who has between 30 and 60 ounces, grams of marijuana. And I asked the question if this was a revenue-generating measure. And this is compounded by the fact that if you cannot pay the fine, all you are asked to do is to give 30 hours of community service. I mean, I find that, I don't know, to me, it does not make sense. And I know the Attorney General has indicated that you can now have not just 4 male plants, but any 4 plants, because the whole point of allowing people to grow marijuana was to give them the opportunity to grow their own weed in order to get high. And the male plants would not do that. So that raises the question of what was the point, and if these consultations took place, 1,000 people, he said, and 1 year's worth of consultations and 4 principal consultations, did the issue of the male plants come up in the consultation, or was this advice given there or not? So perhaps for our benefit, since there's going to be some controversy about the bill, as there always is for this, which is why we are saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we should take this matter to a joint select committee, and I support my colleague from Barataria, Sawa, in this particular instance. I think we can trash it out because we would be supportive of any genuine attempt to decriminalize and to bring some kind of order and system and structure to the management of the marijuana industry in Trinidad and Tobago. So perhaps the Attorney General could let us have, as a beginning, the consultation documents so that we can see whom you consulted. I know you mentioned some names and some institutions and what they said. I think that would be important. And when we take this fixed penalty notice to be issued by the police, how are they going to measure and weigh the marijuana in a person's possession? I mean, is that going to be by conjecture? Is it going to be, are they going to carry a scale? How are they going to measure? Are they going to take them to the police station and measure it there? Because, I mean, the whole point behind this is that you don't want to treat it as a criminal activity. And how will the police determine whether someone is, let's say, under marijuana intoxication while driving? How are they going to administer the test or determine that the person is under the influence of marijuana, so to speak, or intoxicated by marijuana? I think some of these things, I understand the need. I mean, clearly, if you make a law, you don't want it broken. And if you have a law, you want it enforced and applied. But how are these things going to be done? How is the law going to be managed and enforced except for possibly public places and places where children are present? And even there might be issues. And I noticed that the minister will designate those public places and bring the matter to Parliament, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And what is a private place? Is the private place your home only, or a gathering in a private home? Or are we going to have a situation where, through the licensing process, we can license business establishment or private clubs or things like that in which people can freely smoke in those particular jurisdictions? I don't know. I'm only asking for clarification and clarity on these matters. So, in other words, is it your home and somebody else's home also, or can places be designated private places? And how are you going to get marijuana to such a private place, even if it's your home, without walking through or driving through public places? And would that then make you at risk, Mr. Deputy Speaker? You can carry 30 grams anywhere. Okay. So that's clarified. Now, what this...
Please, members.
What this bill makes provision for, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the recreational use of marijuana, but it never says so. No. There is no place in the bill that speaks about the recreational use of marijuana. All right? It never says it is allowing marijuana for recreational use. It deals with possession. Okay? And it does mention the word smoke, and it gives an explanation of what smoke is, but it does not say that this bill allows for recreational use, or whether there's a limit or not, and how you administer that. So this bill does not legalize marijuana, it decriminalizes it in a limited way. And by limited way, I mean that it does it for 30 ounces, but everything above that is an offense. Whether it's a light, 30 grams, sorry. Whether it's a light sentence, so to speak, a light penalty, or whether it is a heavy penalty. So in my view, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill is not what it advertises itself to be. And I don't think it is, I don't think what people expected it to be is what it is. So I wait to see how this is going to pan out. And again, I add to the call made by my colleague for it to go, this bill to go before a joint select committee. Now, it does allow for possession of up to 60 grams of marijuana and 10 grams of cannabis resin. All right? It calls for this not to be a criminal offense punishable by prison. All right? And I guess we can concede that that represents some progress because it is not a criminal offense. But you do pay a fine, so although it is not a criminal offense, it is still against the law up to 60 grams. That is to say, between 30 and 60 grams. Now, we then get into the second bill, which is an act to provide for the regulatory control of the handling of cannabis for certain purposes, and the establishment in Trinidad and Tobago of the Cannabis Licensing Authority and connected matters, right? So this establishes the TT Cannabis Licensing Authority. It has regulatory control of the handling of cannabis, and it is for religious and medical activities. Now, as I said, the word or the term recreational use is not mentioned in this bill. All that is mentioned is religious and medical uses. So I think perhaps we need to have some clarity on this particular matter. And the question does arise, is it for religious and medicinal activities only? So an authority is created, and it comes into force by proclamation. And then, of course, with that, you need regulations. And I want to ask the Attorney General if the regulations have been prepared. Are they?
Yeah.
All right, okay. Now, what this entity, that's to say this authority is responsible for is to regulate the handling, all right, of everything related to marijuana. And the AG read it out. He mentioned the things that it is meant to do. So handling is what you might call an all-encompassing role, all right? And it kind of takes on its own personality in the bill, this business of handling and managing the process of marijuana from cultivation to possession. It can license, it can exert control, it handles. Now, in the Jamaican law, both hemp and ganja are mentioned separately and are regulated for. And they make it clear that it's for medical uses, scientific purposes, and therapeutic purposes. Okay, we have medical and religious in our law, this bill before the House. So these things are not clearly set out in the bill, although medical, therapeutic, and scientific can be said to be covered if you read all the clauses carefully. But as I said, perhaps in other bills, they are much more clear, much more precise about the way they go about their business. Perhaps there's a reason for the way the matters are presented here, and maybe the AG can elaborate on that. Now, with the passage of the Dangerous Drugs Bill, if we pass that bill, the demand for marijuana, in my view, is going to increase. And citizens will have access. And if tourists come to Trinidad and Tobago, they are going to want access. Now, business and commerce, it seems to me, can only take place when the board is established, when the bill is proclaimed, when the regulations are approved. And that is why I asked the member for St. Joseph, because he raised the issue of putting all of these things in place and how they take time, and you can't do these things before they're ready, when the proclamation would take place. Because that would determine whether, in fact, that will determine when commerce takes place, when businesses can be established, and when an industry can begin to take off. And that can only happen when the infrastructure is intact. And I suspect by what both the AG and the member for St. Joseph said, Minister of Health, that proclamation will only take place when everything has been put in place and the institution is ready to conduct its business. Now, I want to ask some questions that I hope the AG will consider pertinent questions, all right? Who can plant marijuana under this bill? Okay, and I understand that it will only happen, it will only be able to happen after the bill is proclaimed and the institution established. Who can sell marijuana under this bill? If I am a marijuana smoker, how do I get my herb, so to speak, without committing a crime, without growing my own plants? How do we get commerce an industry going, Mr. Deputy Speaker? When will the bill be proclaimed, or how long will it take for this bill to take effect? What is the public policy position that this bill is trying to achieve for the management of marijuana as it is identified here as a dangerous drug? Okay, because I think it is important, the public policy position. The AG mentioned the balancing act that has to be achieved, and therefore the articulation of what that public policy position, I think, is important. The other thing is that, and the Minister of Health hinted at it, what do you think will be the social consequence of what the bill is seeking to do, and what ultimately might accrue from the development of an industry here in Trinidad and Tobago, whenever that can start with the proclamation of the bill? And have those social consequences been taken into account? Now, the minister may well get up here and say they have thought through all of these things and they have thought through everything very carefully. But we also know that they thought through Petrotrin carefully and the $100 bill carefully. So I want some clarity about if they have thought through the public policy position and what they are attempting to achieve, and what do they anticipate might be the social consequences of this, which we need to manage, because there's a clause in here that addresses the issue of intoxication on the job. Now, and intoxication in driving. Now, that happens now with alcohol. It's no thing. But what happens with the alcohol is that the alcohol is meant to be used as an individual privilege or choice, and one knows that you're not supposed to come to work intoxicated. And I imagine in the office or on the job or in the factory, the company can indicate what its policy is and deal with it in the company. And if you're driving and you're intoxicated, there's a breathalyzer that will tell the police whether or not you should, in fact, be charged. All right? So I want to raise this issue of public policy and the social consequence. And what are the likely economic prospects? There are two sides of this. One is the business side, in which you create an industry and you build commerce and you possibly create jobs and create an industry here that might be capable not just of serving the local society, but create export products. But there's another side, which is it would be reasonable to address the productivity question and the productivity issue as well. There might be two sides to this issue of economic prospects and economic consequences. What are the leveraging opportunities that we are creating by getting into the marijuana industry at this stage? I mean, this is fairly well established in certain countries, certainly in certain states of the United States. And therefore, we need to understand from the AG what they anticipate in terms of business opportunities, because the issue of business opportunities and involvement in the industry is raised in relation to the board and the fact that board members should not have a pecuniary or a shareholder interest in any business having to do with marijuana. And I have a different point of view on that. I will raise it. What are the benefits and liabilities, therefore, ultimately, I'm asking the AG, of this legislation? Because I think he used it to us to tell us what the public policy issue is, what the social consequences are that they anticipate, and therefore what are the plus and minuses at the end of the day as he asks us to support this bill. And as I said, we are not yet ready to support this. We want it to go to a joint select committee. Managing a, yes.
Speaking time has expired. You have an additional 15. Care to avail yourself? Proceed.
Now, we are managing here a controversial issue in a society of multiple interests. Some people are totally against intoxicants of any kind. Will this particular legislation curb the marijuana drug trade, and if so, how? You see, this is a problem that is bothering me about these bills, because I see the opportunity for recreational marijuana use, although it is not stated like that. I see the opportunity for social engagement with marijuana. I see the penalties, but I don't see how the drug trade in marijuana is going to cease because of this legislation. And I think the AG needs to explain to me how that, or explain to the House or the people, how that is going to happen. Because as you know, marijuana is often used in bartering in relation to other bigger and more heavy intoxicants, heavier intoxicants. All right, so they are traded, for instance, so that you could buy cocaine. All right, and so I want to understand how this will bring an elimination to the marijuana illegal trade in drugs if what we are doing here is decriminalizing. Now, alongside that, can legitimate marijuana-based businesses develop from this? All right, because the answer may very well be that we are going to be established in a legal business. And will the legitimate marijuana-based businesses develop from this? And would taxes make a difference? Does the government anticipate that taxes would make a difference to government revenue? And the reason I ask that is because there are clauses in this bill which say that the government will support the institution that they are creating, the control board, so to speak. And I can see them making a provision as the government for it to establish itself and get going. But if they are going to license a spreading and growing marijuana business and make money from it, and marijuana now, the trade is being legalized according to the bill, it seems to me that this institution should be supporting itself rather than asking taxpayers for money. Okay? Because if the purpose of the institution, the control board, is to manage and handle, and I said handle has its own personality because they're handling everything. If they are to do that and to manage and handle the industry, then they should pay their way. Government should put the money that is required to establish it and make sure that it gets off the ground and it's on a solid footing, but they should pay their way. Now I want to say something about the management and dealing with marijuana everywhere. In October 17, 2018, Canada legalized recreational marijuana in full. Individual provinces now determine how the product gets distributed and sold. So they pass a law, and then they leave it to the provinces. In the United States, it varies across states, but there is no federal law that deals with this matter. In Mexico, you have decriminalization of 5 grams or less, but it is still illegal. Cultivation and sale of marijuana is still illegal. By the way, you can't cultivate marijuana in Canada either. In Belize, you can have up to 10 grams of marijuana in a private home. In Costa Rica, marijuana is not legalized. all right? And there is no law to decriminalize the process, but there are no legal penalties for smoking anywhere. You could smoke in the beach, you could go wherever, and that is how they deal with it. In Jamaica, it has been decriminalized since 2015. A member of the Rastafarian community is allowed unlimited use, and there is heavy tolerance in Jamaica on beaches, music festivals, etc. In Argentina, in March 2017, medical marijuana became a free product available to anybody, and there are no arrests in that country for recreational use for the last decade. In Colombia, over a decade, you can have up to 20 grams. That is decriminalized. It is illegal to grow or sell, but it is also legal for a person to grow up to 20 plants. In Ecuador, 10 grams decriminalized, illegal to cultivate or sell, but a tolerant policy. In Peru, illegal to grow or sell, or you can smoke in a private home. In Uruguay, which became a hot topic. Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member, for giving way. I heard you say that it's illegal to cultivate marijuana in Canada. What did you mean by that?
They have not legalized the growing of marijuana as an industry. Yes. Is that true?
I Googled it, and it says you can cultivate up to 4 plants at home. So that's not cultivation?
No, I'm talking about, no, I'm talking about industry, not just a person.
Okay, okay, members. Members, please, let's.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Uruguay, which became quite famous recently for what they did, they legalized it for 18 years and up, and you can register to grow, to buy, or to sell. Commercially, marijuana can be bought in Uruguay from a pharmacy. You could go to any drugstore and buy it. Oh, God, let me pronounce it how I know it now. In most of Europe, whatever the legal situation, there's a lot of tolerance, except in a country like France, where they don't tolerate it so much. And in Portugal, all drugs have been decriminalized in Portugal. There is no jail sentence for the use of any drugs, and they recommend rehabilitation and treatment for anybody who is found to be in a state where they really cannot manage or handle their drugs. So there are different ways of dealing with these things, and every way that you deal with it has a certain philosophical position that attends it. It has a certain understanding of what might be the social consequence, and it has a certain sense of what will be achieved by the bill and what would be the fallout. And it is that I wish the Honorable Attorney General to speak to, if he is willing during the close of this particular debate. And I am saying that because all of these things require some clarity, I think it is better to trash this out in a joint select committee. Now, the member for St. Joseph talked about the opioid crisis, and that is true. Now, this is something kind of strange. This is drugs made by drug companies that are given to doctors, sold in the drugstore, and people got hooked on it, and you had an entire epidemic,
big pharma mafia,
from which the country could hardly recover right now. I mean, this is one of the biggest crises in North America, but particularly the United States of America. Okay, and we know the situation with alcohol, which is that, I mean, alcohol, you want freedom, you want individual choice, etc. And most people can handle it, but some people cannot, and you end up with a situation in which you have alcohol addiction of various kinds, which are very costly. And the point I am making here is that, as the Minister of Health said, he said that you have to be cautious about how you go with this. I think it is more than caution. I think you have to manage your intervention here very, very carefully in an extremely balanced way with very clear views about why you are doing this, how you're going to do it, and what is likely to happen. Now, nobody is God. Nobody has prescience to know exactly what is going to happen. But it seems to me that the role of responsibility in this is to give with a certain amount of clarity, based on the information you have, really what you intend to do and why you intend to do it. Now, the minister said he had the regulation, so that is good. There are so many things in this thing. I mentioned the issue of self-financing, the issue of the board. Would it be better to have a board, as is suggested by this legislation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is totally divorced from the industry? A board of technocrats or people with scientific knowledge, medical knowledge, etc., as this bill proposes? Or would it be better to have a stakeholder board with public interest presence? That is to say, you have people who know the industry, who are involved in the industry, who understand the industry, and have an interest in its development. But you have a public interest presence to make sure that these fellows don't run away with the entire, what can I say? The entire game. And the 30% local ownership, given what has happened here, I mean, how many people will lock up for growing marijuana in Biche? How many thousands and possibly millions of marijuana trees over the years have been burnt down in Biche for growing marijuana illegally, etc.? Do we really want to have an industry in which the ownership of the local is only 30% of the industry? I think we need to raise that. I think we need to raise that to give people a local stake in it, just as you take into consideration the fact that you want to bow to public opinion in order to do something that is reasonable, that would satisfy the need, the demand, the feelings of people, the general tone in the entire world about this particular thing. I think that the industry in Trinidad and Tobago, if we are to do it, and I'm still concerned about the proclamation of the bill, when the industry will start, when it will become commercial, and that we are not just doing something to create the opportunity for the use of 30 grams of marijuana and the industry is somewhere 10 years down the road. So it seems to me that these two bills are critical one for another. Because if you make changes to the bigger bill, the bill with, I can't remember, I think about 60 clauses.
Remember, you have 2 more minutes.
Yes, if you make changes to those bills, you never know how it's going to affect the other one. And if you make changes to the small bill, it may affect the bigger one as well.